my 8-year-old son, slid his empty plate away from the Thanksgiving table and said the words that would break something inside him that I'm still trying to repair. "You're the mistake that ruined everything." She said it clearly, not whispered, not mumbled under her breath where she could pretend later that she didn't mean it. She looked at my child, my Hollis, and she called him a mistake in front of 14 family members, 3 neighbors, and the catering staff she'd hired to make herself look impressive. Then she served everyone else, turkey with all the trimmings, homemade stuffing, cranberry sauce she'd been bragging about for a week. She placed each plate down with a smile, made small talk about the recipe, accepted compliments on the presentation, all while my son sat there with nothing in front of him, his small hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the empty space where his plate should have been. He didn't cry. That's what destroyed me the most. He didn't cry because he'd learned not to cry in front of Aunt Nessa. Somewhere along the way, my baby had figured out that showing pain around her only made things worse. So he sat perfectly still, his chin steady, his eyes dry, looking like a little soldier who'd been trained for exactly this kind of cruelty. And I did nothing. I sat there. I watched it happen. I opened my mouth to speak and nothing came out. My mother, Doreen, was 3 seats away, suddenly fascinated by her napkin. My brother-in-law, Bradley, cleared his throat and reached for the wine. The neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances but kept eating. The only person who reacted at all was my niece, Wren, Nessa's own 16-year-old daughter, whose face went white with horror as she watched her mother humiliate a child. But I was his mother. I was supposed to protect him, and I just sat there, frozen, while my sister told my son he shouldn't exist. After what felt like an hour but was probably 30 seconds, I reached across the table, took Hollis's plate, and served him myself. My hands were shaking so badly that I spilled gravy on the tablecloth. Nessa didn't even look at me. She just kept talking to her guests about how difficult it was to find good organic turkey these days. We left early. I made some excuse about Hollis not feeling well, which wasn't even a lie. He looked sick, gray and small and somehow older than 8 years old should ever look. In the car, I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, waiting for him to say something, to cry, to ask me why Aunt Nessa was so mean. He didn't. He just stared out the window at the passing houses with their warm lights and their normal families and their Thanksgivings that probably didn't include adults telling children they were mistakes. When we got home, he went straight to his room. He didn't ask for dessert. He didn't want to watch our usual Thursday night movie. He just climbed into bed with his clothes still on and turned his face to the wall. The next morning, he said he wasn't hungry for breakfast. The morning after that, same thing. By day 4, my son had barely eaten anything. A few crackers, half a glass of milk. He claimed his stomach hurt, but I knew the truth. Something had broken inside him, and food wasn't going to fix it. I should have confronted my sister. I should have called her that night and screamed at her until my throat was raw. I should have told my mother exactly what I thought of her for sitting there in silence, while her grandson was verbally destroyed. I should have done 100 things differently, but I didn't. I told myself I needed time to find the right words. I told myself that starting a family war right before the holidays would only make things worse. I told myself that maybe, if I just gave it some space, Nessa would realize what she'd done and apologize on her own. I was lying to myself. The truth is, I was scared. After 32 years of being the little sister, the one who caused problems, the one who was always told to keep the peace and not make waves, I didn't know how to fight back. Nessa had spent my whole life making me feel small, and even when she attacked my child, I couldn't break free from the pattern. So I focused on Hollis. I made his favorite foods even though he wouldn't eat them. I told him I loved him so many times that the words started to feel hollow. I held him at night when he finally cried, 4 days after Thanksgiving, and I promised him that he wasn't a mistake, that he was wanted, that he was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I hated myself for not saying those words to my sister's face in front of everyone the moment she opened her mouth. I thought that was the end of the story. I thought I would just quietly cut Nessa out of our lives, let the relationship die a slow death of unreturned calls and declined invitations, and focus on healing whatever damage had been done to my son. But exactly 1 week after Thanksgiving, at 2:14 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Nessa. and she was sobbing so hard that it took me almost a full minute to understand what she was saying. Her daughter, Wren, had left her, packed her bags, called her uncle, and walked out the door with a letter that contained every truth Nessa had spent years refusing to hear. And what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my sister, my family, and the silence I'd been keeping for far too long. To understand what happened at that Thanksgiving table, you need to understand my family. And to understand my family, you need to understand the two very different daughters my mother raised. My name is Tamsin Marrow. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a veterinary technician at a small animal clinic in Dayton, Ohio. It's not glamorous work. I spend my days holding anxious dogs during blood draws, cleaning kennels, comforting families when we can't save their pets. The pay is modest, the hours are long, and I come home most nights smelling like antiseptic and dog hair. But I love it. I've always loved animals more than I love most people, and there's something deeply satisfying about spending your days helping creatures who can't help themselves. I live with my son Hollis in a small 2-bedroom rental about 15 minutes from the clinic. The house isn't fancy. The kitchen faucet drips. The heating system makes strange noises in January, and the backyard is barely big enough for the secondhand swing set I bought Hollis for his 6th birthday. But it's ours. I've made it ours. The walls are covered with Hollis's drawings. The refrigerator is plastered with his school photos and report cards, and every corner of that little house contains some memory of the life we've built together. Hollis is 8 years old, and he is the best person I know. I'm not saying that because I'm his mother. I'm saying it because it's true. He's the kind of kid who notices when someone is sad and tries to make them feel better. He brings me dandelions from the yard because he knows I think they're underrated. He wants to be a veterinarian when he grows up, and on weekends he comes to the clinic with me and helps feed the animals who are boarding overnight. The staff adores him. The animals adore him. He has this gentle, quiet way about him that makes every living thing feel safe. He's also sensitive in ways that worry me sometimes. He takes things to heart. He remembers unkindness long after most kids would have moved on. And he has spent his entire life trying to win the approval of people who were never going to give it to him. People like my sister, Nessa. Nessa is 6 years older than me, and growing up, she was everything I wasn't. She was organized, she was ambitious. She planned her life in 5-year increments and actually stuck to those plans. She got straight A's, captained the volleyball team, graduated valedictorian, and married Bradley Kincaid 2 weeks after finishing her business degree. Bradley's family owns a chain of furniture stores across 3 states, and Nessa moved into a 4-bedroom colonial with a 3-car garage before she turned 25. I was the other daughter, the dreamer, the one who changed her major 3 times, who dated the wrong guys, who never quite figured out what she wanted to be when she grew up. My mother, Doreen, loved us both, I think, but she didn't hide which daughter she understood better. Nessa was predictable. Nessa made sense. I was a question mark that never resolved into an answer. When I was 23, I made the mistake that would define my relationship with my sister for the next decade. I got pregnant. His name was Derek. We'd been dating for 6 months, and I thought I was in love with him. Maybe I was. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that when I told him about the pregnancy, he disappeared. Not dramatically, not with a fight or a confrontation. He just stopped returning my calls, moved out of his apartment, and left me to figure out the rest on my own. I decided to keep the baby. It wasn't a complicated decision for me. I wanted him from the moment I knew he existed. But the timing was catastrophic. My pregnancy announcement came 2 months before Nessa's wedding. The wedding she'd been planning for over a year. The wedding that was supposed to be the crowning achievement of her perfectly orchestrated life. Suddenly, all the family attention shifted. My parents were worried about me, worried about the baby, worried about how I would manage as a single mother. The money they'd set aside for extras at Nessa's reception went toward a security deposit on my first apartment. My mother spent the weeks before the wedding helping me set up a nursery instead of helping Nessa with final preparations. The wedding still happened. It was still beautiful, but it wasn't the center of the universe anymore. And Nessa never forgave me for that. She never said it directly, not at first, but I felt it in 1,000 small ways over the years. The way she looked at Hollis like he was an inconvenience, the way she excluded him from birthday parties and cousin sleepovers. The way she made comments about accidents and poor planning whenever I was in earshot. My mother always told me to ignore it, to give Nessa time, to keep the peace for the sake of family unity. So I did. For 8 years, I kept the peace. I swallowed my anger, made excuses for my sister, and told myself that eventually she would see Hollis for the amazing kid he was. I was wrong. And this Thanksgiving would prove just how wrong I had been. I almost didn't go to Thanksgiving this year. I'd been making excuses in my head for weeks. Hollis had a slight cold. I had to work late. The car was making a funny noise. Any reason would have been enough to stay home, order pizza, and watch movies with my son instead of subjecting us both to another holiday of forced smiles and subtle cruelty. But then my mother called. "Please, Tamsin," she said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. It's been such a hard year for everyone. Nessa promised she'd be on her best behavior. I just want one nice holiday with my whole family together. Is that too much to ask? I wanted to tell her yes. I wanted to tell her that asking me to bring my son into a house where he wasn't wanted was, in fact, too much to ask. But I didn't, because after 32 years of being Doreen Marrow's daughter, I still couldn't say no to her. "Fine," I said. "But if Nessa starts anything, we're leaving." "She won't," my mother promised. I talked to her. "Everything will be fine." So I told Hollis we were going to Aunt Nessa's for Thanksgiving, and his face lit up in a way that made my chest hurt. He'd made a card for my mother, a construction paper turkey with googly eyes and a message inside that said, "I'm thankful for my family." He'd also been practicing a joke he wanted to tell at dinner, something about a turkey crossing the road. He must have rehearsed it 20 times in his bedroom, trying to get the timing just right. In the car on the way over, he clutched the card in his lap and asked me the question that should have made me turn around right then. "Mom, do you think Aunt Nessa will like me this year?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror, at his hopeful face and his carefully combed hair and his best button-down shirt that he'd picked out himself. And I lied to him. "Just be yourself, baby. That's enough." We pulled up to Nessa's house at exactly 2 o'clock. The Colonial loomed at the end of a long driveway decorated with tasteful autumn wreaths and perfectly arranged pumpkins on the porch steps. Through the windows, I could see people moving around inside, the warm glow of a house that looked like something from a magazine spread. Hollis grabbed my hand as we walked to the front door. His palm was sweaty. Nessa answered on the second knock. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and tailored pants, her hair blown out like she'd just come from a salon. She looked at me, then down at Hollis, and her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "You made it," she said. "Come in, everyone's already here." I handed her the bottle of wine I'd brought, an expensive red I'd spent way too much money on, hoping it might serve as some kind of peace offering. She glanced at the label, nodded once, and set it aside without comment. It would sit unopened on her counter for the rest of the day. Inside, the house smelled like roasting turkey and cinnamon candles. My mother rushed over to hug us, exclaiming over how big Hollis had gotten, how handsome he looked in his nice shirt. Hollis tried to give her the card he'd made, but before she could take it, Nessa intercepted. "Oh, how sweet," she said flatly, barely glancing at the googly-eyed turkey. She set it on a side table next to a stack of mail, where it would be forgotten for the rest of the afternoon. The other guests filled the house. Bradley's parents, stiff and formal as always, a couple of neighbors Nessa had invited to show off her hosting skills, and Wren, my niece, who broke away from a conversation to run over and wrap Hollis in a hug. "Hey, little cousin," she said, ruffling his hair. "I saved you a seat next to me at dinner, okay?" Hollis beamed at her. Wren had always been kind to him, the one bright spot in our visits to this house. But I noticed Nessa watching the interaction with a pinched expression, like her daughter's affection for my son was a personal betrayal. The afternoon crawled by, and with each passing hour, the small cruelties accumulated. When Hollis asked for apple cider, Nessa said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "We only have the organic kind, not the cheap stuff you're probably used to." When he tried to join the other children playing video games in the den, she redirected him to the kitchen, claiming she needed the space. Kept clear, but really just wanting him out of sight. When he laughed too loudly at something Wren said, Nessa shot him a look that made him shrink into himself and go quiet. I kept catching my mother's eye across the room, silently begging her to say something. Each time, she just gave me a small shake of her head. "Don't make a scene. Keep the peace." The same message I'd been receiving my entire life. By the time dinner was announced, My stomach was in knots. I should have left. I should have taken Hollis and walked out the door and never looked back. Instead, I followed everyone to the dining room table and sat down for the meal that would shatter my son's sense of belonging in his own family. The drive home from Thanksgiving was silent, not the comfortable silence of two people who don't need to fill every moment with words. This was the heavy, suffocating silence of things that couldn't be said, of damage that was still being measured. I kept glancing at Hollis in the rearview mirror. He sat perfectly still, his seatbelt pulled tight across his chest, his eyes fixed on nothing. The construction paper turkey card sat crumpled on the seat beside him. At some point during the chaos of leaving, he'd retrieved it from the side table where Nessa had abandoned it. Now he wouldn't even look at it. When we got home, he went straight to his room without saying goodnight. I stood in the hallway outside his door, my hand raised to knock and then lowered it. What would I even say? What words could possibly undo what had been done? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed replaying the moment over and over, watching my sister slide that plate away, hearing her voice say those words, seeing my son's face as he absorbed the blow. And in every replay, I saw myself sitting there, frozen, mute, useless. The mother who couldn't protect her child. The next morning, I made pancakes. Chocolate chip, Hollis's favorite, shaped like little bears the way he'd loved since he was 4. I set the plate in front of him with a glass of orange juice and a hopeful smile. He pushed the food around with his fork. "I'm not really hungry, Mom." "You barely ate anything yesterday," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Come on, just a few bites." He took one small bite, chewed mechanically, and then asked to be excused. The plate was still nearly full when I scraped it into the trash. Day 2 was the same, and day 3. By day 4, I was genuinely frightened. My son, who usually devoured everything I put in front of him, who asked for seconds and snuck cookies before dinner, had barely consumed anything in almost 100 hours. He was pale. There were shadows under his eyes. When I hugged him, I could feel his ribs more prominently than I should have. That night, I sat on the edge of his bed while he pretended to read a book about dinosaurs. I took the book gently from his hands and set it aside. "Hollis, we need to talk about what happened at Aunt Nessa's." He didn't look at me. His fingers picked at a loose thread on his comforter. "I know what she said hurt you," I continued, "and I need you to know that none of it was true. Not one single word." He was quiet for so long that I thought he wasn't going to respond. Then in a voice so small I had to lean in to hear it, he asked the question that shattered what was left of my heart. "Mom, am I a mistake? Did I ruin everything? Is that why Dad left? Is that why Aunt Nessa hates me? Did I do something wrong just by being born?" I pulled him into my arms and held him while he finally cried. 4 days of holding it together, of being brave, of pretending he was fine, and it all came pouring out in great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. I cried too. I couldn't help it. I cried for my son and for my failure and for all the years I'd let my sister chip away at his sense of worth while I stood by and watched. "You are not a mistake," I told him fiercely. "You are wanted. You are loved. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Aunt Nessa was wrong to say what she said, and it had nothing to do with you. Do you understand me?" "Nothing." He nodded against my chest, but I could feel the doubt still living in him. Words weren't going to be enough. Not anymore. After he fell asleep, I sat in my dark living room and composed a dozen different messages to my sister. Some were furious, full of profanity and accusations. Some were pleading, asking her how she could do this to a child. Some were cold and formal, announcing that I was cutting her out of our lives permanently. I sent none of them. I told myself I needed time to find the right words. I told myself that firing off an angry text at midnight would only make things worse. But the truth was simpler and more shameful. I was still afraid of her. After everything she'd done, some part of me was still the little sister who got nervous when Nessa was upset, who twisted herself into knots trying to avoid Nessa's disapproval. On the 5th day, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from Ren. Aunt Tamsin, I am so sorry about what happened. I cannot stop thinking about Hollis's face when Mom said that. It was cruel and wrong, and I told her so. She screamed at me for 20 minutes, called me disloyal, said I was choosing you over my own mother. I do not care. What she did was unforgivable, and I need you to know that I love Hollis. He is not a mistake. He is my favorite cousin, and I think he is wonderful. Please tell him that for me. I read the message 3 times through tears. This 16-year-old girl had more courage than I did. She had looked at her own mother and called her behavior what it was. She had defended my son when I couldn't find my voice to do it myself. I texted back thanking her, telling her she wasn't responsible for her mother's actions, telling her that her message meant more than she could possibly know. And something shifted inside me. I still didn't confront Nessa, but I made a decision. This was done. No more holidays in that house. No more exposing my son to someone who saw him as anything less than the miracle he was. What I didn't know was that a reckoning was already coming, and it would arrive at 2 in the morning, 1 week later, with my sister sobbing on the other end of the phone. The phone rang at 2:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, running through the same mental loops I'd been trapped in for a week. The sound cut through the darkness like an alarm, and when I saw Nessa's name on the screen, my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. Maybe it was the hour. Nobody calls at 2 in the morning with good news. Hello? The sound that came through the speaker barely registered as human. It was raw, animal grief, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deeper than tears. It took me almost a full minute to understand that the gasping, choking sounds were my sister trying to speak. "She's gone," Nessa finally managed. "Tamsin, she's gone. My baby left me." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. "Nessa, slow down. Who's gone? What are you talking about?" "Wren." Her voice cracked on the name. Wren packed her bags and left. She called Bradley's brother Reed and asked him to come get her. "She's gone, Tamsin. My daughter is gone, and she left me this letter, and I can't breathe. I can't breathe." I listened to my sister hyperventilate on the other end of the line, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction, though. Part of me thought I should feel that. Not vindication. Just a hollow, exhausted sadness for everyone involved in this mess. "Tell me what happened," I said. Through broken sentences and shuddering breaths, Nessa explained. Wren had been distant ever since Thanksgiving. Cold. She'd stopped coming down for family dinners, stopped engaging in conversation, stopped looking at Nessa directly. When Nessa confronted her about her attitude, Wren had exploded. "She said I was a monster," Nessa whispered. "She said she watched me destroy an innocent child and she couldn't respect me anymore. I told her she was being dramatic, that she didn't understand adult family dynamics, that Hollis would be fine, and she just looked at me like I was a stranger, like she didn't know me at all." That conversation had been 2 days ago. Tonight, Nessa came home from a charity event to find Wren's room half empty. Her clothes were gone, her laptop, the photos from her bulletin board, and on the bed, a single envelope with Mom written on the front. "Read it to me," I said quietly. Nessa's hands were shaking so badly I could hear the paper rustling through the phone. She started reading, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I have tried for 2 days to understand how you could say what you said to Hollis. I have tried to find excuses for you. I have tried to convince myself that I misheard or misunderstood, but I didn't mishear. I watched you look at an 8-year-old child, a child who has only ever wanted you to love him, and I watched you call him a mistake to his face. I watched him try not to cry because he has learned that crying around you makes things worse. I watched Aunt Tamsin sit there, frozen, because you have spent so many years tearing her down that she has forgotten how to stand up, and I realized something that broke my heart. I don't know who you are anymore, or maybe I finally do know who you are, and that is worse. I don't want to become the kind of person who hurts children because of her own bitterness. I don't want to become you. I am going to stay with Uncle Reed until I figure out who I want to be. Please don't contact me until you have figured out who you want to be too. I love you, Mom, but I don't like you right now, and I am not sure when I will again." Nessa dissolved into sobs. I sat in my dark bedroom, the phone pressed to my ear, and let her cry. There was nothing to say. Her daughter had held up a mirror, and Nessa was finally seeing what the rest of us had seen for years. When the sobs subsided enough for her to speak again, Nessa said something I never expected to hear. "I didn't mean it, Tamsin. I know that doesn't matter. I know the damage is done. But I need you to understand that I didn't mean any of it. I have been so angry for so long, and I don't even remember why anymore." "Then why?" I asked. "Why have you spent 8 years punishing my son for existing? What did he ever do to you?" The silence stretched between us. When Nessa finally answered, her voice was barely audible. "When you got pregnant with Hollis, I had just had my second miscarriage. Bradley and I had been trying for years. After Wren, we wanted more children. We wanted a big family, and I kept losing them. 2 miscarriages in 18 months. And then you called to say you were pregnant by accident, by some guy who didn't even stick around, and you got to keep yours." I closed my eyes. In 8 years, Nessa had never told me this. "You got pregnant without even trying," she continued. "And I couldn't stay pregnant no matter how hard I tried. I hated you for it. I hated him for existing when my babies didn't. I know it's not fair. I know none of it was his fault or your fault, but I couldn't stop feeling it, and the feeling just grew into something rotten, and I let it poison everything." "That's not an excuse," I said quietly. "I know." She was crying again, softer now. "I know it's not, but it's the truth. And I am telling you because Wren asked me to figure out who I want to be, and I think that starts with being honest about who I've been." I thought about my son, finally sleeping peacefully down the hall after days of barely eating. I thought about all the birthdays he wasn't invited to, all the holidays where he was treated like an afterthought, all the small cruelties that had accumulated into one devastating moment at a Thanksgiving table. "I'm sorry about your miscarriages, Nessa. I genuinely am. But my son has spent his whole life wondering what he did wrong to make you hate him. He asked me if he was the reason his father left. He stopped eating because a grown woman told him he was a mistake. Your pain doesn't give you the right to poison his childhood." "I know," she whispered. "I know that now. How do I fix this? How do I fix any of this?" I didn't have an easy answer. There was no quick fix, no magic words that could undo years of damage, but I knew where it had to start. "You can start by apologizing to my son, to his face, without excuses, without explanations, without making it about your pain. You hurt a child who did nothing but exist. If you want to fix anything, that's where you begin." 3 days after that phone call, Nessa showed up at my door. She looked like she hadn't slept since Wren left. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes were swollen, and the put-together woman who always looked like she'd stepped out of a catalog was nowhere to be found. In her place was someone broken open, raw in a way I'd never seen before. "Is he here?" she asked quietly. "Can I talk to him?" Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face and tell her she'd lost the right to speak to my son the moment she called him a mistake. But I thought about what I wanted Hollis to learn from this. I wanted him to see that people could change. I wanted him to see that apologies mattered, and I wanted him to see that his mother was strong enough to allow for redemption without being a pushover. "You can talk to him," I said, "but I'm going to be in the room, and if you make excuses or try to explain away what you did, we're done. Permanently." She nodded. "I understand." I led her to Hollis's room, where he was sitting on his bed drawing pictures of dogs. He looked up when we entered, and I watched his whole body tense at the sight of his aunt. The wariness in his eyes made my heart ache. Nessa didn't try to sit on the bed or get too close. Instead, she lowered herself to the floor, sitting cross-legged so she was looking up at him rather than down. It was a small thing, but I noticed it. She was trying to make herself less intimidating. "Hollis," she said, and her voice was steady even though I could see her hands trembling. "I came here to apologize to you. What I said at Thanksgiving was wrong. It was cruel and unfair, and none of it was true. You are not a mistake. You have never been a mistake. You are a wonderful, kind, creative boy, and I am so deeply sorry that I made you feel like you weren't." Hollis studied her face for a long moment. He had his father's eyes, observant and careful, always measuring. "Why did you say it then?" he asked. "If it wasn't true, why did you say it?" Nessa took a breath. Because I was angry about things that had nothing to do with you. I was angry about my own life, my own problems, and I took it out on you because you were an easy target. That was wrong. That was cowardly. And you did nothing, absolutely nothing, to deserve it. It really hurt, Hollis said quietly. I thought maybe I was bad, like maybe I did something wrong just by being born. I watched Nessa's face crumple at those words. She didn't try to hide it or compose herself. She let him see the impact of what she'd done. I am so sorry I made you feel that way, she said. You are not bad. You have never been bad, and you have every right to be angry at me for as long as you need to be. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to know the truth. You are loved. You are wanted. And I was wrong. Hollis looked at me, then back at his aunt. Finally, he nodded slowly. Okay, but I don't want to come to your house for a while. Is that all right? That's completely all right, Nessa said. Whenever you're ready. If you're ever ready. That's up to you. It wasn't a made-for-television reconciliation. There were no hugs, no tears of joy, no instant forgiveness. But it was real. It was honest. And it was a start. The months that followed were slow and difficult. Nessa started seeing a therapist. She wrote letters to Ren every week, even when Ren didn't respond. She showed up differently, more carefully, checking herself before she spoke, catching her own cruelty before it could escape. 3 months later, Ren came home for a weekend visit. 6 months after that, she moved back permanently. She told me later that watching her mother actually do the work, actually change, instead of just promising to change, was the only thing that could have brought her back. I had my own difficult conversations to navigate. I sat down with my mother, Doreen, and told her the truth I'd been holding back for years. I told her that her constant pressure to keep the peace had made me complicit in my own son's mistreatment. I told her that choosing silence over protection wasn't neutrality. It was a choice, and it was the wrong one. My mother cried. She apologized. She admitted that she'd always expected me to be the flexible one, the one who bent so the family wouldn't break. She promised to do better. These conversations didn't erase the past. Nothing could do that. But they created space for a different kind of future. The following Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner at my little house with the dripping faucet and the creaky heating system. The table was too small, the chairs didn't match, and I overcooked the turkey by about 20 minutes. None of it mattered. Nessa came with a homemade pie and sat next to Hollis without being asked. Ren helped set the table and made everyone laugh with stories about her first semester of college applications. My mother actually relaxed, actually enjoyed herself instead of spending the whole meal managing tensions that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Before we ate, Hollis stood up with a piece of paper. He'd prepared a joke, just like he'd tried to do the year before. This time, everyone listened. This time, everyone laughed. And when he sat back down, grinning with pride, I saw Nessa reach over and squeeze his shoulder gently. He didn't flinch. I used to think keeping the peace meant staying quiet. I thought it meant absorbing pain so others wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. I thought it meant protecting relationships at any cost, even when those relationships were hurting the people I loved most. I was wrong. Real peace isn't silence. Real peace is safety. It's knowing that the people who love you will stand up for you when it matters. It's teaching your children that their worth isn't negotiable, that their place at the table isn't conditional, that they don't have to earn the right to exist. My son is not a mistake. He never was, and I will never let anyone make him feel that way again. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up, if you've ever watched someone you love be mistreated and wished you'd been braver, I hope you take something from this. It's never too late to find your voice. It's never too late to protect the people who matter. And sometimes the people who hurt us the most are also capable of change, if they're willing to do the work. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story touched you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time you found your courage when it mattered most. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Your support means everything, and I'll see you in the next one.